Okay, I think we'll make a start. Hi, and thanks everyone for coming along tonight or joining us tonight. I'm Rory Waterman, a member of the English and Creative Writing staff at Nottingham Trent University and the convener of Nottingham Creative Writing Hub at NTU. And this is a Nottingham Creative Writing Hub event. I'm also the co-lead with Anthony Caleshu of the AHRC-funded Poetry and Covid project, which is the focus of tonight's event. Nottingham Creative Writing Hub is the central place for creative writing at Nottingham Trent University, and it's hosted by the Department of English, Philosophy and Communications. NTU is home to dynamic and long-established undergraduate and postgraduate courses in creative writing at BA, MA and PhD, with an exciting, thriving, diverse community of writers, one of whom you'll hear from tonight, who's actually studied at NTU at BA, MA and PhD. If you go to our website, and I'll put a link in the chat shortly, you'll find links to our courses, member profiles, a blog, and information about forthcoming events, among other things. Before long, there'll also be videos and audio from many of our previous events. A little bit of housekeeping before I pass over to Anthony, who's going to chair tonight's event. Those of you in the audience will be able to see and hear the readers throughout the evening, of course, but audience members, you can't be seen or heard yourselves. So if you're, I don't know, in an old pair of pajamas eating spaghetti bolognese with a three-pronged fork, for some reason, we can't see you. All of you in the audience are invited to ask questions and make comments. And there's a chat function for comments. You'll see that at the bottom of the screen. And there's also a Q&A button down there as well, where you can submit questions. You can submit those questions at any point throughout the event, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. And now I'll get out the way and I'll pass to the event chair, Professor Anthony Caleshu, who's head of English at Plymouth University and who leads the Poetry and Covid project with me. And I'll rejoin him for the Q&A. So Anthony, over to you.
Thanks very much, Rory. A warm welcome to the near 100 of you joining us tonight from around the world for this Poetry and Covid event. We're delighted and thankful to be hosted tonight by Nottingham's Creative Writing Hub. I'll be introducing tonight's readers in turn, but first just a few words about the Poetry and Covid project. Poetry and Covid is an international project funded by the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council. And as Rory said, it's led by myself at the University of Plymouth and Rory at Nottingham Trent. We're dutifully supported by our research assistant, the newly doctored Sam Kemp, who is responsible for maintaining our website, www.poetryandcovid.com. We began the website in June 2020. It includes a variety of resources, but most significantly, over 1,000 poems submitted by near 500 poets responding to the pandemic, thousands of comments, likes, tweets, and social messages from readers hailing from over 100 countries around the world. We've now hit 75,000 views, and we're heading to that goal of 100,000 by our one-year anniversary of June 2021. The aim of the project was, and remains, to consider the role of poetry as a mode of discourse, with now confirmed hopes that it might help people find solace during times of isolation, times of general dearth of inspiration, as cited by media and medical journals alike. Tonight, we're here to celebrate the launch of our just published anthology, Poetry and COVID-19, an anthology of contemporary, international, and collaborative poetry. Inspiration, we can convincingly declare now, can be found in this anthology. In the summer of 2020, we invited 19 UK-based poets to partner with poets from around the world to work collaboratively on poems responding to the virus. Poetry, of course, has always been thought of as a singular art, but this mode of collaboration seemed to us then, and seems to us now, an appropriate response for a pandemic which couldn't be tackled by any one person, never mind any one nation alone. The anthology features some of the most celebrated, and I might say some of Rory and my favorite, poets from around the world. With us at the virtual Nottingham Creative Writing Hub tonight are three of those poet pairings, as well as Nottingham Trent University's own Lauren Terry. The three poet pairs are Sinead Morrissey and Wagner, with translator Iain Galbraith, David Hurd and Sharmistha Mohanty, Carol Leeming, and Rakshan Rizwan. The anthology appears almost exactly 1 year since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. The poems in the book are often as personal as they are communal and as local as they are international. They're diverse in styles and approaches, an eclectic mix of what it means to be living through these complex times. And so, to our first reader tonight, Lauren Terry. Lauren's critical creative thesis explores the synaptic connections between Euro-psychoanalysis, modernist poetic language, and material objects in the works of Amy Lowell, Lola Ridge, Mina Loy, Gertrude Stein, and the Baroness Elsa von Frieti-Loringhoven. Her poems have appeared in several anthologies and poetry journals, including The Wonderful Molly Bloom and The Interpreter's House. She'll be reading tonight from her debut chapbook, Museum of Lost and Broken Things, published and available by Leaf Press in 2020 during the first national lockdown. Please welcome Lauren Terry.
Hi everyone, thank you Anthony for that lovely introduction. I'm really happy to be with you all tonight. As we've all been kind of collectively confined to our homes for the best part of a year now, I thought I'd begin with a poem for all of the houses I've ever occupied, so the people and things which haunt their foundations, and it's called Dream House. She slams the door so hard the knob flies off, where tacky carpets pluck the shoes from your feet and black mold eats orange matte emulsion. Wipe it down with foggy water, grey dishcloth in a pail. Watch shadows flit between rooms where sheets make ghosts of cabinets. You slice the line of tape to let things breathe and dare not use her flannel for fear of smelling lavender, where cling film wraps the body of the tub. An uncapped drain dribbles yellow and squirrels gnaw wires in the crawl space. She keeps the house awake at night, chattering, cardboard, chipboard, cupboard, clipboard. Paint your name beside the others beneath the wallpaper. Watch hot breath leave her body and know that in this cavity there was once a wall. So my next poem is all about the kind of fundamental strangeness of the domestic object, a theme which many of my poems kind of deal with in the pamphlet and beyond. And it's about an object's kind of hidden life and its propensity to almost border on the unnameable. And this one is called The Other Side of an Apple. Imagine the other face is flat or blue in a bowl of other fruits with various other names. Split the apple clean in half, and in the ovary there are pits for such pips on the hot, wet mound of your tongue. Things resemble apples, pregnant apples in form or colour. On the other face, is there a knife in its back? Is there a tooth or botfly feasting, a shrunken head or abstract flatness? God, do not bash it. Imagine God is an apple. You would spit God into the palm of your right hand and let God plunge. The lapse might kill it, spill its pips. The push would make it flat on its other face. And my final poem for the evening is titled after a shadow box by the modernist assemblage artist Joseph Cornell. And this particular shadow box contains a porcelain doll in a cloth dress and straw hat, and she's kind of peering out from behind a knot of twigs, and it's quite a haunting piece of art. And this poem is a retelling of that doll's story, and it's called Baby Marie. When Marie's dress turns the sour yellow of bad milk, I take her out to the thicket at the foot of our apple tree. Because Marie's head goes around and around, she wears her collar high to hide the deep black slit where her swan's neck and pretty head should meet. When night falls, Marie taps at my window, begging to come home. But the grinding of her joints keep me up, and I pull Marie's arms from their sockets to put them in a box, should she ever need them again. Marie's eyes are black craters in a full moon, and she is gone by morning. Because she is not sorry, I lop Marie's hair with scissors, and when she weeps, I kiss her little nose, poke flowers through her straw hat, and I bury Marie, face down in the thicket at the foot of our apple tree. Thank you.
Fantastic, Lauren. Thank you very much. We'll be reserving all questions and so forth until the very end. So we'll keep progressing with our next readers. So next up we have Sinead Morrissey and Iain Wagner, as well as translator Iain Galbraith. Sinead is the author of 6 books of poetry and winner of, I probably believe, every prize we have to offer in the UK and Ireland, including the T.S. Eliot Prize, the Irish Times Poetry Prize, and the Forward Prize. Also, she is the winner of the E.M. Forster Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the European Poetry of Freedom Award. Her selected poems, Found Architecture, was published by Carcanet in 2020. She's professor of creative writing at Newcastle University and director of the Newcastle Centre for the Literary Arts. Iain is the author of 7 poetry collections and winner of numerous international prizes, including the Friedrich Holderlin Award in Germany, the Zolkin International Poetry Prize from China, and most recently, the Prix Max Jacob from France in 2020. His work has incredibly and wonderfully been translated into 40 languages. Sean's translator for his anthology contribution, Iain Galbraith, is a poet and essayist as well as a translator. He's won the Stephen Spender Prize as well as the Popescu Prize for European Poetry Translation. So prizes all around. We're delighted to have the 3 of you with us. And I'm not quite sure how your collaborative kind of work is going to be read and performed tonight. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Hello, it's lovely to be here, and thank you so much to Rory and Anthony for the invitation to take part in this vitally important COVID and poetry project. And when I was asked to think of someone with whom I would like to collaborate, I immediately thought of Iain. I'd been reading his work and I've admired it ever since I came across it. So that was the person who immediately sprang to mind. And then of course, Iain was on hand to do his, as ever, brilliant translations of Iain's poems. And it's been a real honor to work with 2 such brilliant writers as a result of this collaboration. So Iain, I think what we should do really is just read the poems in the order in which the sequence occurred. So I started us off. We decided that we would not write individual poems together, but that we would respond. So there was a poem I wanted to write anyway, and then Iain responded to that. And then I responded to the poem that Iain wrote, and again, Iain responded to that. So it was like a kind of relay poetry collaboration. So I'll begin and I'll read the first poem in our sequence. And when we were thinking of a response to the pandemic and to COVID, we both agreed that we would like this response to be tangential. And of course, one of the great pieces of work that poets undertake is to find corollaries for things and to find image structures which can speak to the deep nature of our experience. And my son had recently told me about Sealand, which is a derelict naval fort between England and France, which a man in the 1960s declared as his own kind of free principality. And so the experience of isolation and living in our own houses and being confined to the tiny countries of our houses, and if we've been in lockdown with our families, the tiny country of the little platoon of our families. And so that was the objective correlative that I went to in my mind. So this is Sealand. I know all the colours of the sea, dirt green, tar, mud, incarnadine. It laps at the pillars with its million lips, yet eats so slowly, I'll be long since dishevelled by sharks, by Osedax boneworms, eyeless burrowing, by the time this kingdom topples. Fort of my heart, fort of my steel persistence, where there is only each instant, ringed and given and lit and without alternative. Carry me on to judgment. The washerwoman sea hangs out its mists like laundry. Dolphins, distant shipping. I made my wife a princess, but she rarely visits. She has flashy, miraculous teeth and longs to be photographed. Clouds, contrails, stars. E mare libertas. I fret over inheritance like Henry. Even the gun deck reeks of freedom, not a sliver of land in sight from the rust-eaten lookout. Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset. The days contain their replicas, which they kindly unfurl. Meals out of mess tins, admin, horizon scanning, sleep so deep and faceless I've reverted to factory settings by morning. The flag of the world's smallest country snaps in the wind and I dream of a football team. As I jog the lovely contours of the bullseye helipad in ever decreasing circles. Happiness happens.
Well, good evening from Germany, from Berlin, or slightly north of Berlin. Sinead, I was delighted when you asked me to participate in this project. Although these projects, I think, tend to be or can be frightening too, because there's such an amount of pressure. You have to deliver something and respond to, well, sometimes marvelous poems, as the poems you sent me. But in this case, it was pure pleasure, and was beautiful to see what developed in the course of our work. I think it would be too much if I read two poems, because we're going to read the German poems in the original version and the translation. So we'll just say quickly that my response to Sinead's first poem was also a poem about an island, about Inchkeith, which is not too far away, and it's a historical poem based upon the story that two newborns were taken to Inchkeith in order to see what language they may develop, whether they would speak the tongue of angels, possibly, or God's language, or some other language, sort of early experiment of a cruel linguistical kind. But I will not read it. Anthony, I think I was supposed to read only one poem because of the fact that Iain and I will read together. So I will skip this poem and pass it back to you, Sinead, to read your second poem, possibly.
Okay. So Iain's response was about, as he's just said, it was an island. It was this historical, very cruel experiment where children were brought to this island to see if they would speak the language of angels or the language of God. And so I responded in the voice of a woman who has been raised, it's historical too, but raised with some extreme evangelical Protestant sect. And I was thinking of the idea of the tin tabernacles, and the idea that you would stand there and God would be so close, he would be palpable through the roof. And how terrifying that would be if you had no intermediary, and if the language of violence, which is the focus of Iain's poem were to become internalized. The iron room. This roof is so fine, so sheet metal thin, it brings God close as a shiver, as a shudder, turns all weathers into God's reminder. When it rains, God drums his thumbs. When it snows, he fleeces us blue and breathless. Without bricks or beams to hold him further off, his sheer love funnels down, enveloping us. So when we pray inside the cold, white heat of him. There is no interloper. Our mouths are awash with sin and vinegar. I know to stand in the field, at the mill, in the tabernacle. God is under my breastbone, but can't tell who my blood, my white-knuckled heart in all that feathered rushing will be snatched, and who myself apart.
Well, my second response to Sinead's poems was more indirect. I picked up certain elements, or to begin with, the three-part structure of Sinead's poem reappears in my German poem. The vinegar appears as well, and heaven is speaking not in rain but in snow, and certain words or phrases, this roof, reappear in German. As it were. So it's a three-part poem. I'll read the German original first. Das Reisen in Zeiten der Pest für Sinead Morrissey. 1. Auch du hast gehört von den weißen Kreuzen auf Türen, kennst die Aushänge von letzter Woche, abgerissen am Zaun wie Schafwolle im Wind. In Grüppchen die Bauern, die dich mit Blicken wiederkäuen vor den Feldern aus Sonnenblumen im Frühherbst. Schwarz, gebeugt, geschlagene Heere, Rückzugsmanöver. Sobald es dämmert, beginnen die Schenken ein Stück überm Boden zu schweben an ihren Lampions. Du hörst die Feiernden kreischen wie Brutkolonien, die Quacksalber, ihr Quecksilber und Prediger, die aus Kisten wachsen wie haarige, exotische Pflanzen. Die Krähenlunge hat sich aufgebläht über dem Acker, fällt zusammen in einem Pünktchen Aas. Ist dies die Rettung oder eine Falle? Und wird die Erde reichen für uns alle? 2. Die Karten gibt es noch, doch scheint das Land nicht mehr zu passen. Ein Hoheitsgebiet, 2 Völker, die Kranken und die es noch nicht sind. Was für Zeiten gestern noch, als man in jeden neuen Morgen kroch, wie eine Hummel in die Windenblüte. Nun Prozessionen, volle Dome und Läden verrammelt mit Nacht, nur Bibeln und Essig boomen. Du musst auf Zeichen achten, auf Details. Die frischesten Kerben im Schaft des Beils, ein Fenster, das sich öffnet, die irrenden Lichter am Morgen. Passierscheine, Atteste, Dokumente. Papier, das aufgefaltet allein von A nach B gelangen könnte. Wähle zum Schlafen das einsamste Haus. Bleib deinem Schatten 2 Schritte voraus. 3. Die Decke dieser Kutsche muss aus Eiche gezimmert sein, so dumpf klingt das Geschrei der Spatzen, doch es gibt sie. Und ziehst du den gestickten Vorhang zur Seite, siehst du Vogelscheuchen und Zirkuswagen, Wiesen, Dampf und Dörfer, den Uhu, angenagelt an die Scheune wie irgendwelche Thesen, ein Pamphlet. Was dir der Himmel schenkt, ist Schweigen in dichten Flocken, die größere Stickerei. Am Wegrand ab und zu ein totes Pferd mit offenem Bauch, die Eingeweideorgel darin. Der Kutscher hat zum Mittag wohl Kohl gegessen, flucht von seinem Bock. Ein Weg blockiert, die Stadt nicht länger vorhanden, jene Route ungewiss. Denk, es blüht die Aster mitten im disaster. And I would like to finally thank Iain once again for his marvelous translation.
Good evening, indeed, from Wiesbaden, also in Germany. I have known Iain for quite a few years now. Indeed, I started translating his poetry more or less as his first book appeared, which is going back till 2011, I think it is, isn't it? Your first book. Was
2001.
2001, sorry, yeah, it's much easier. Time passes, yeah. I'm going to read the poem that you've just heard, my translation of it, and I'd like to complete our reading with the poem with my translation of the poem to which Sinead responded with her Sealand. So I shall be reading two poems. Travel in times of pestilence for Sinead Morrissey. 1. You too have heard of white crosses on doors, have seen last week's postings in tatters on fences, like sheep's wool aflutter in the wind. Small groups of peasants, their gaze chewing you up like cud beside the fields of sunflowers in early autumn. Black-browed, stricken, defeated armies, orderly retreats. As dusk falls, the taverns begin to hover, tied to their lanterns a foot above the ground. You hear the revelers squawking like breeding colonies, the quacks with quicksilver, and preachers growing out of their boxes like hairy, exotic plants. The crow's lung balloons over the tillage and collapses to a dot of carrion. Is this salvation or merely a pitfall? Will the earth have room for us all? 2. Maps are still to be had, but seem not to match the country. A single territory, 2 nations, those already sick and those not yet. What times are these? And barely a day passed since we crept into each new sunrise like bees into bindweed blossom. It's all processions now. Cathedrals thronging and shops shuttered with night. Only vinegar and Bibles booming. It's the signs and details you need to watch. On the hafts of axes, the freshest notch. An opening window, stray lights in the early hours. Passes, testimonials, letters of transit. Papers that alone, unrolled, could extend from A to B. Choose lodgings where few people go. Keep 2 steps ahead of your shadow. 3. The roof of this coach must be timbered in oak, so muffled are the sparrows' cries. But they are here. And pull the embroidered curtain aside, and you'll see the scarecrows and circus wagons, meadow mist and hamlets, the eagle owl nailed to a barn like some set of theses, a pamphlet. What heaven bestows upon you is silence in thick flakes, embroidery of a greater kind. Now and then by the wayside, a dead horse with its belly open, its organ's organ within. Our coachman must have dined on cabbage, cursing from his box. One way's blocked. The town no longer exists. The other routes a risk. Consider the aster. It blooms in the midst of disaster. And finally, Iain's poem, Approaching Inchkeith, which begins with an epigraph taken from the History and Chronicles of Scotland by Robert Lindsay of Pitscottie, and provided them with everything they would need for their nourishment: food, drink, fire, and candle, clothes, and all other kinds of necessities needed by man or woman. He was desirous to discover what language the children would speak when they came of proper age. Two untainted by sin and a maid mute from birth. It's a quip of the sort to kick off some alehouse yarn of, or legend of a saint. Away to larboard, the roar of the surf. To the fore, the storm-worn cliffs, and lass whose stub of a palate, the moment she tries to speak, flaps about like a herring dancing on the mole. Wooded island. More like a clod, the Lord, bored with creation, flung away. A mile of loneliness and har, unredeemed, as forlorn as a seabed wreck. And then this sky of slate. Speech to me is after the crossing, when I hold my fare in my fist or yell ashore to a friend to catch my dock line. The name we call a thing is like the thing, I think, while the wind of the west hoists another tattered gull above this fathomless realm of cold and salt. But how will they speak? First to the maid, then to anyone else? Like breakers, tongues of angels, a crackle of embers, storms, the peal of distant bells on the breeze? Will one scrunch like pebbles underfoot on a beach, while the second, like the scraggy goat, utters an occasional bleat? Thank you for listening.
That was fantastic. Really so lovely to hear. Thank you, Sinead. Thank you, Iain. Thank you, Iain. I think one of the anthology is an anthology published in the English language, but we are so fortunate to have three of our UK poets pairing with poets in Germany, Iain, in China, and in Korea, working with wonderful translators. So we're especially grateful. And it's lovely that Shearsman was able to reproduce the work in the original language, Shearsman being one of the great promoters of poetry and translation in the UK. So it was really lovely to hear that in its original language as well. Thank you. Our next readers are David Hurd and Sharmista Mohanty. David's collections are All Just, Out With and Through, all from Carcanet. Walk Song from Equipage and Songs from the Language of a Declaration, published from my own press, Periplum. He's widely known and published as a critic of modern and contemporary poetry, as well as a writer on the politics of human movement. He is co-organizer of the incredibly important project Refugee Tales and professor of modern literature at University of Kent. Sharmista Mohanty is coming to us tonight from Mumbai, and she's the author of 3 works of prose, Book 1, New Life, and 5 Movements in Praise. Her most recent work is a book of poems, The Gods Came Afterwards. Her work has been published in important journals around the world, and she herself is founder editor of the celebrated online literary journal, Almost Island, as well as the initiator of the Almost Island Dialogues, an annual international writers gathering held in New Delhi. She teaches at the International Creative Writing MFA program at the City University of Hong Kong. So please welcome David Hurd and Sharmista Mohanty.
Thank you very much, Anthony. It's a real pleasure to read with such wonderful writers tonight. And it's an honor to be part of this important project. I was delighted to be invited along, and I was thrilled when Sharmista said that she would collaborate. I've been reading Sharmista's work for many years, and I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to write with her. We started our collaboration by writing letters to one another from our different positions in relation to the pandemic. And then when we found we had a tone and a thematic that we could share, we started writing poems. Sharmista wrote first and I wrote in response. And in total, we wrote 6 poems. So Sharmista will open. Thank you, Sharmista. Sharmista, you're muted.
Sorry about that. No, I was just saying thank you, Anthony and Rory, and thank you, David, for giving me the opportunity to work in this project and to work with you, David. It's been a great pleasure and a great learning experience. So I'm just going to start reading we've titled our poem, Conversation, Like the World, Not Yet. The little girl is lost to others. She knows where she is, protected by the mountains behind her and the sea ahead, the natural barriers of the subcontinent. She lives on the plains in between, in the forests and by the rivers. Sometimes when she stands on one leg, she can feel the land moving in its almost imperceptible tectonic travel northeast. She knows she is not alone. A wind from another geologic age moves through the forests, inconsolable. It creates waves of the rivers. The little girl is embryonic, like the world not yet created from the vast dark waters at the beginning of time. She contains lives within her, but it is as a little child that she remains most potent, most potential. Her grown self comes to visit her often, holding the child in her lap, feeling her unblemished skin. The child wraps her arms around the neck of her older self. They look at each other. The little girl is already able to withstand, but she can also break, because breaking is an ability. She knows what her older self forgets, that they are both capable of crossing their own finitude. Others have lost the little girl in their centrifugal dispersion. But she, traveling in the opposite direction, can see everything. The sorrow that comes from the impermanence of things, the depths of the ordinary, the sweep of the river valleys, and the way her solitude alternately lights up and darkens the landscape.
A couple hold each other's hands against a northern landscape. They are not lost, but each day they walk as if recovering their ground. the earth where they would stand, and where the sky shapes towards their horizon in the patterns against the tree line, where against the evening they remember stars, one by one, and they know that they have come this way before, as children to whom the world seemed open and immense, and they would gather what they could find, albeit under the cover of childhood, or after, as they followed toward their younger selves. As if the sequence would carry on, they had been bearers of this conviction. Now they step out each September evening as if discovering their way across the valleys and the fields, as if they might coordinate their motion to the scale of the understanding the new beginning brings. This is the dance. It feels to them like a slow waltz. As the chords with which they are familiar fall away, they are left to find their step, and on the hard earth as they witness and where the distances are not the same. And they try to listen for the sounds, name what they hear calling, articulate the rhythms of that which is coming to pass. They walk, and as they walk, they mark the old bearings, the ordinary as it falters, the new dance.
A tapir moves on the banks of the Las Piedras River in the Amazon forest. Behind him, the banks rise into low green cliffs, dense with vegetation and trees. The tapir moves very slowly, looking down at the ground, prehistoric animal, walking with the weight of the millions of years that his species has been here, with each step moving from his origins till today. Mourn the sight dimmed from sewing up the near, the lost measure of the near and far. Mourn the indivisible individual, the assertions that lash the air. Mourn the end of what can be attained only by asking, the time when deep was the depth. Mourn the fatal arrhythmia at the heart of things, the faltering of wings and eyelids and hands and breath.
If they could dance, they would dance, but the air falters. They wish they could talk about the moment when the world lost its breath, how it felt to be on the earth while the snows melted, how they had crossed over, started to count what was left. The things they could do without, that which they couldn't learn not to live with, leaving, or maybe the feeling that they were coming back, having spoken and made plans, and knowing all they planned might not yet happen, but it wouldn't matter, because something surely would come to pass, something they might think of as an event, and one by one they would remake the narrative, how things started before there were imaginations in the astral dark, and how the snows came and the rain, and each day had its own adventure, and they would sleep, and in the morning they would resume their part of living and looking out. They knew that they had come this way before, but never in a season when the world had stopped, futures fallen away, and in the dark, the breathless, fighting against the element until the light dropped, until the loved ones had gone, until the days had righted, until the tapir and the humans had crossed the earth, as they wished and as they spoke, as if it was the moment after, not the dance that was coming. So still, they walked.
The air falters, and the measure of making, of doing, is undone. To make is to work always against the unmade, looking far, seeing what is not yet. Behind what is, there are dying herbs and seeds, languages lying in the undergrowth, beliefs in the deep riverbeds. ways of knowing decomposing in the soil. The world grows narrower, thinner. Forests are felled and brushed back from the highways. No dirt or mud anywhere. The two lines of the road will meet exactly as the law of perspective says, at infinity.
They walk. This is undone business they have before them. They are learning quickly what they wanted to protect, like the passage of events, how the world would just have kept on happening at street corners, accidentally running into friends, or people you hardly knew, those with whole lifetimes of stories, who would tell you one, and that way the day would be spent quietly, not in style, like people happen to be connecting, intending, seriously, they should do this again, talking and splitting off, carrying part of the others with them, like the girl in the mountains who laid down her thread so that she knew if she needed, this was a place she might come back to, sleep, somewhere she could catch her breath, listen, take a breath. The couple didn't know what it would come to, but each evening as the dark came, they tried to find their step, stars against the trees and the hard earth stretched before them, remembered futures, days left. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you very much, Shamista. That was a gorgeous reading, and it was my incredible privilege to have an opportunity to hear those poems and to interview and talk with you on the Scottish Poetry Library podcast, which is due to be released, I believe, in the next week or so. So everyone keep an eye out and an ear out for the Scottish Poetry Library's podcast featuring David and Sharmista in a week or two's time. Our final poets are Carol Leeming and Rakshan Wizwan. Carol was awarded a MBE in the Queen's New Year Honours List for 2019 for her contribution to arts and culture in Leicester. She is a multi-award winning poet and multidisciplinary artist working in literature, performing arts, and digital media. She's the author of the chapbook, The Declamations of Cooleye, and her Coro poetry is referenced in the Cambridge University Companion to British and Asian Literature. She is lecturer in performing arts at De Montfort University. Rakshan is the winner of the Judith Kahn Memorial Prize for Poetry and the author of the pamphlet Paisley, shortlisted for the Michael Mark. Her monograph, Kashmir Life Narratives, explores the intersections between human rights and literature in the Valley of Kashmir. She is the author, I believe, of the forthcoming Emma Press collection, My Sneezes Are Perfect, a debut children's poetry collection, which I really look forward to. Originally from Pakistan, she currently lives in California. So please welcome Carol and Rakshan.
Thank you. I'd love to say, firstly, thank you to Rory and Anthony for involving me in this project. It was a wonderful thing to work with Rakshan on this project as well. And I'm really quite humbled to be with such fantastic poets assembled tonight. The first thing I would say is that Rakshan and myself were paired together. Independently, we were familiar with each other's work and knew something of our individual voices, and kind of fairly early on thought we would write our own poems, but that we sort of agreed some things that we were going to share collaboratively. We knew we were going to write about women's lives. You know, the personal is political, and we also knew that we were going to talk from those positions, and also to talk about the body and the way women are confined. And some of these things we shared, and in particular, we wanted to invoke strong images. And that was the starting point. But it's worth saying at the beginning, we had a real sense of inertia in terms of the topic, in terms of the subject of COVID and what that meant. but we had a series of really fruitful and productive and stimulating conversations together. And from that, for both of us individually and collectively, these things we could pursue, and our poems emerged from that process, those wonderful conversations and exchanges about the whole COVID and the things that we thought were important.
So thank you, Rory and Anthony, for involving me in this project. I feel very honored, as Carol said, to be part of such an illustrious group. I think I'm probably the youngest member of this panel and probably the least experienced. But it was wonderful working with Carol. It didn't feel, I know it's weird to meet someone for the first time over Zoom. It can be quite a weird experience. But with Carol, it felt, I know this is going to sound cliched, but it felt like I'd known her forever. It just felt easy and comfortable. And in the beginning, really it just started out with a kind of struggle to put the big realities that we were dealing with in paper. And so we just started talking to each other about things that were important. And in those conversations, a strong sort of feminist aesthetic, the body as the kind of locus of various realities, the person as the political certainly became very important, and the domestic space as a kind of space that's become highlighted during the pandemic, and is suddenly a very important space, a very fraught space as well, and the burdens of caregiving that have fallen mostly on the shoulders of women during this time. So those things became important. So we decided, okay, we're going to write our own piece, and then these themes should hopefully come out and resonate with each other's piece, and these should be important. And so I hope that we were able to sort of encapsulate those themes that we signposted, and it worked very well. It was effortless. And I'll just let Carol start by reading her piece, which is so beautiful.
Thank you so much, and yours is wonderful too. So I'll just say a few brief things that faced with this huge inertia, there was just a refrain that kept going around my head, and it was some things that never seemed to fail me. And through that, I started to find this poem. And then also I had an experience some years ago where I'd heard Landai poetry, 2-line poems that are written by Afghani women, and was really struck how 2 lines at a time, the kind of subtext between those lines really were really powerful. So I'm going to start. Some things that never seem to fail me: hearty spiced meat, rice, piping, comfort. What I think I should do, I don't, emphatically. To exult in a staid inertia, a vicarious thrill. A bath, soporific with fine essential oils. Frankincense, notes solace of lavender. A sex toy, hummingbird tips divinely. My wine's spasm, floridly psychedelic. Blurry rambles along 2 quiet streets. Suddenly, a stranger's furtive, rusty smile. Walks, parks, filled with elated trees, grass. Hiccuping streams, boastful struts of birds. Imaginary friends to walk me late at night. Drink lucent stars thirsty to swallow inky sky. Fervent prayers dance night into day. Ancestral viridian songs with ululations. Peppery music fills glaring voids at home. Tunes play full-bodied motion to gladden. Mist love's heartstrings strum fondly. Absence mints most kindly all my tears. A glazed memory winds into view, filigrees of a lover's succulent caresses. A room of faux quietude disarms my soul. Solitary pursuits gratify as studied reveries. A newfound fetish for my hair, skin, nails. Profound novel self-love of an epic scale. Left to my own devices at home, I am coyly naive. Dressing up mirror says the clothes my fantasies fit. Habitual escapism in films, my choice to steal time. Flickering squared eyes offer criticisms unsurpassed. A phone computer of cobalt pixels shoots staves of love. I dematerialize, materialize into rooms, so I am there. To hear quiet isn't silent, as dead people live close by. Speaking to loquacious silence, its secrets duppy dances, a recipe for grief. Recall all of your lost ones' witless banter. Keep memories of stupid things loved ones did till you roar. A recipe for anger. For venal government homicidal lies, curse, guttural expletives at TV, rise, drink chamomile tea. A pair of stern knitting needles clicks crisscrossing. I, like a tricoteur's, do banish all dread to instill calm. Be an Arevis goddess, culinary conjurer. Facebook eats all my photos before I gorge luscious food. Mute pillows, willingly, mercilessly punched or tightly held. Kitchen utensils broken, thrown, forcefully bashed, relieves. Alchemy, sing loudly, tremulously for potent mood boost. To dance solo or with a partner causes ecstatic flying. To revel, mysterious, allure, kinky mask sex appeals. As a world drags, pauses with a forethought and effect. A recipe for depression. Sleep long, plumb pearly dreams. Wake up, say carpe diem till you laugh loudly. To immerse in seas of words, pleasure seeking in books. Take in fluent chapters by the writer's heirs of imagination. Imagine voices, faces, family, friends, their cheery chorus. Unseen lines, tracing bonds, holding a space that is me. So I'll hand over to Rakshan for her wonderful poem.
Thank you. It's called Disappearing Act, The Disappearing Act, and it talks about how women are sort of being erased in these times of COVID, and they're disappearing from workplaces, from other kinds of spaces, in a sense from history, and what this means for the feminist movement, and what this means for being a woman of color in these times. The Disappearing Act. Elizabeth Siddal, the Sunday painter, model for the pre-Raphaelites. Razia Sultana, Iltutmish's daughter. Mileva Maric, Einstein's wife. How do we prepare for this impending erasure? Alice Munro told us to write short stories as we watched the babies. Susan B. Anthony said, "Ride a damn bicycle, ladies. It's just better, more efficient." "Rise," Maya Angelou commanded us. It's the problem without a name, as per my friend Frieden. I call it a fast-growing tumor in the marrow. Let's catch it early, the doctor says. To the ghostly X-ray, the tumor, the shape of a seed, becoming the civilization, amassing mass as we remain mired in the days. Serving ghee, cream, and our dreams to the hungry universe, the invisible economy of women. Here, see this work, I pinpoint to the field of my cyclical efforts. The tended to, the produce, the children, the spoils, the order. Here, I cannot stop talking about it. The quicksand of oblivion, a terrible sleep, is taking us over, obsolescence, no escaping it. Bound to our homes outside the sky, a terrible shade of yellow. Each breath is ash. The Golden Gate Bridge disappears behind a plume of smoke. I draw in air to find rest, respite, but in my sleep I hear a multitude of voices, raised as I am by centuries of vanished women. Their mongrel tongue is my language. They begin singing, "Shrink yourself, be less, grow closer to your ribs, become manageable, small, be bite-sized, be nothing. Be the antidote to the animosity, the vaccine to the vacuousness, swallow the sadness, mellow the melancholia, untangle the unsolvable, tinker with it with your teeth, melt into the economy. That is the solution to market forces, pathogenic invasions, climate change, wildfires, unemployment, racism. Keep asking where it hurts. Keep hugging your huddled masses. Keep finding solutions in your bodies. Keep vanishing in numbers unaccountable. Keep disappearing in names unnameable. Keep taking falls for all of us. I shush the voices, they quieten down. With my hands, I turn my skin into a field of shea butter. Exorcise from it the residual histories. Then I move down the nape of my neck, deep into my shoulder blades, which stretch outwards to the sky like Icarus mid-flight. I carefully untie each knot, each call to sacrifice, and set every tortuous contortion of muscle memory free.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rakshan. Thank you so much, Carol. So lovely to hear the words come off the page, and it's second best thing to be able to experience you both reading the work live, to be here on Zoom, but really powerful and wonderful work, as people are kind of telling us in the chat. So now, after hearing from our readers tonight, and we encourage all of you to that are witness to this event tonight, please do applaud the readers in the chat, and do let them know how much the poems mean to you, because it is a fascinatingly intimidating thing, I think, to be invited to contribute to something with time sensitivities. I don't think poets are always quite used to that, and I was listening to Iain talk about the pressure and Carol talk about the inertia that comes. And I think that's exactly right. I think it's a really difficult thing to be tasked with collaborating in this medium. And you've all done so incredibly wonderfully. Rory and I are so delighted to be able to organize the event and have all of you taking part tonight. I just received the first copy from Shearsman, so the book has gone live into the world, which we're thrilled about. And Rory and I have an introduction to the book, and we end the introduction with this line: "We count these works as the sorts of successes and survivals which our poets would not have come to on their own." And And I think that for us is one of the most novel things about this project. And what we're most keen to celebrate is this notion of collaboration and communal response during really challenging, complex times. And again, utterly grateful to all of you for taking part in the event tonight, for all of you kind of writing these poems, taking that time to engage in this particular art during this period of pandemic. So with that, what I'd like to do is ask a couple questions, bring Rory back into the conversation.
Hello.
We'll also bring Sam Kemp into the conversation, our research assistant, who's been remarkable this entire period of almost a year coming up now. Let's go to Rory for the first question. And then if anybody in the audience would like to ask a question, we pretty much have this Zoom space for the next 20 or so minutes. So we're very happy to allow the conversation to reach out and for all of you to take part in it. So Rory, you can start us off.
That's right. So yeah, please put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. We have, and I was very much hoping that you had a copy of the anthology to hand, and it looks beautiful. And I haven't actually held a copy yet because that's the proof, and it came to Anthony, so it's very exciting. But it's out imminently. We have two questions in the Q&A already. So the first question I'll ask is from Moira Garland. How long did you have for the collaborative process? And I think actually that's one that I can answer quite easily. Can I remember well enough, Anthony? You tell me if I'm wrong. I think we settled on our list of poets in June, and then the poets had until October to submit the collaborations. However, we extended that until the end of November. So it was about a 4-month period, if my maths is very good, which it isn't. There were some extensions beyond that and some things that changed beyond that a little bit, but that was generally the period. Another question in the Q&A from someone presumably not called anonymous attendee, who asks, I would like to ask if any of our wonderful poets, I'd like to ask any of our wonderful poets about their opinions of form in poetry. So I assume this is a question about uses of formalism, which of course some of you engage with more than others. Do you feel there is still a place for formalism in contemporary poetry? Or do you think we will sort of edge more towards other kinds of flexibility of expression outside of formal poetry? What are your thoughts on that's really not really a question about poetry and COVID, but it is obviously relevant to discussions of poetry. So yeah, it seems like a very interesting place to start. So I'll see if any of our, I mean, Sinead, it strikes me that you play around with form in pretty interesting ways.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. There's a place, just as passionately as I would say, there's a place for all kinds of experimentalism and not writing in very formalistic ways. So I would hate to be prescriptive in any way about what has and what has not got a relevant place in contemporary poetry. So, and just neither of the two poems that I wrote for this collaboration are particularly formal, but I do use formal structures, and I've certainly used a lot of different formal structures in the past. And I find form really enabling and surprising, and I kind of think writing within structures and exploring what that makes possible is a kind of lifetime apprenticeship, and for me is so bound up in the journey of poetry that I couldn't ever eschew it, actually.
Does anyone else have a comment on that? I know, for example, that both Anthony and David are avowed new formalists. No, they're not. But do either of you have any comments on sort of formalism?
I don't think I won't answer the question, but I will ask Carol if she doesn't mind, because the Lande is such an amazing form, the Afghani form, and you write these incredible. They're couplets. They're these 2-line couplets as you progress through the poem. I just wondered, could you talk about that? It's one of my favorite forms.
Yes, I was just thinking, I do write non-formally, mostly my poetry, and I do write long form, sort of narrative prose poetry in terms of monologues as courier poems, and work with, you know, sort of non-Western rhythm and things like that. And in terms of the Landai, I was just struck by it. For example, these Afghani women might be sort of, you know, saying some lines about ironing, you know, and then, you know, washing up. But between those two lines, there's this sort of resonating is sort of domestic duress, you know, and that's why I was very taken with it. And it's partly why I like poetry. It is about that compression sometimes, isn't it? But I think, in answer to the question, I think it's wide open as to what mode, you know, the poet is going to go down. Sometimes I think you want to write a poem and you're going to use a formal structure, as Sinead was saying, and open all sorts of doors with that. But equally, probably sort of like myself, I'm looking at other types of forms of writing, and I do write a lot of free verse as well. So, you know, it's whatever you've got in your toolkit and what you want to use, I think.
Carol, I was going to come to you actually to headline the answers to the questions. So Anthony jumped me there. But one thing I wanted to ask you specifically about was the Courier Poem, because you're a practitioner of the Courier Poem. It won't be familiar to some of the people in the audience. And that has its own rhythmic based sort of formal restraints, doesn't it? But oral restraints.
Yeah, I think people are familiar with sort of long narrative prose form type poetry, but you know, and sort of bardic traditions and epic poems. But I think Ntozake Shange sort of coined the Courier Poem because it is poetry that's written for the page, written in sort of verses, and certainly the verses I write are sort of numbered, and they're written to a non-Western rhythm. So I use Afrocentric rhythms, but the sort of end process of a Courier poem is it's embodying orality. So it is going to be performed, you know, in terms of physical theatre. There'll probably be music and digital visuals. So it's this kind of multidisciplinary form, but it works on the page as a sort of, it has narrative, but it also works as people moving through space, you know, actually embodying those words and through rhythm very, very strongly.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Does anyone else want to come in on that, or shall I move to the next? I'll move to the next, but if you do think of anything you want to say about that, then please do. So I'm going to roll these two questions together. David Gale and Emma George, their questions are being rolled together because they're quite similar in a sense. How has the COVID year, it is indeed, changed your writing and responses? It feels a long time. And then Emma says, to the poets, lockdown seems the ideal condition for a poet. Has enforced solitude meant you write in different ways? And I suppose I'd extend that to say, have you written more or less during this period? Does anyone want to come in on that? Rakshan, what about you? Because you've got something coming out, of course.
Right, yes. So I tried my hand at children's poetry for the first time, which is a form that I am not at all familiar with, wasn't. And it was a product of homeschooling my 6-year-old and reading a tremendous amount of children's literature with him. So I suppose I have been productive in a sense, and this time has allowed me to explore the bounds of the kind of writing that I'm comfortable with doing. So in that sense, I suppose I have thrived during the pandemic, but I would disagree with this idea that poets thrive in solitude. I certainly don't. I think that the richness of a life outside the home and a life in the real world is actually feeds directly into at least my writing. And I think that losing that richness my writing has been poorer for it. Although, so I guess to answer the question, I have been productive. I suppose I have been writing more, but yeah, I think I miss being tethered to other kinds of realities and spaces, and I think that is enriching. So I would absolutely not want this solitude to continue.
I would
the
say
pieces that I would produce would be quite boring and repetitive after some time. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, I'd second all of that. You know, in terms of my own experience, I didn't write anything. Anthony and I, we're in the anthology as well. Anthony paired with the Japanese poet Mariko Nagai and myself with the Zimbabwean poet Tagara Muzananamo. And I hadn't written a line or wanted to really until I set to that task. And since then, I've only written poems in response to events that have happened in my life that really would have happened regardless of the pandemic. The pandemic itself has been a very dampening effect on my poetry. But does anyone else feel like that or feel very differently? Carol?
Yeah, I found it a complete dampener, and I was surrounded by people I could see on the internet flourishing and writing lots of things, and I was the absolute opposite. I don't believe in writer's block, so I don't think it was that, but it was just emotional roller coaster of the pandemic. And like Rakshan was saying, I am something of a flaneur. I do spend a lot of time in coffee bars and that sort of thing, and bars, and this is all part of my writing process. So being sort of shut down in COVID wasn't conducive to that. So I did have that real inertia. I did find it, you know, everyone's saying, I'm writing new poems, and I'm like, I'm writing nothing.
Yeah. David, Shamista and Iain, do you have anything to add? Any of you?
So I confess to having enjoyed the quietness of the early part of the pandemic. The first lockdown, I was completing something or trying to complete something, and I found the silence and the quietness, or the sounds that came through the silence, really conducive to that. And then it was a real pleasure to write with Sharmista. And just to go back to the formal question, if you don't mind for 1 second, we had read together in a very, very kind of pre-lockdown event. Wonderful reading. I was really lucky to be in Mumbai. It was a wonderful evening reading, and we were both writing in a mode, I think, that had a similarity. Which was kind of quite short lines, formal, but quite short lines. And so we took a shared decision that we would write a prose poetry just to kind of allow for an expansiveness. But since then, I've been writing all kinds of other prose and then doing all kinds of other work, and then really, really resenting the lockdown and everything that comes with it. And I can't wait to be in somewhere, anywhere that isn't this room. Exactly, this room has been my space for 12 months, and I look forward to the moment when it's not my only space. Sorry, that was a rant.
That's a good job. It's a lovely room you've got there, David.
Yeah, it's showed off to its best advantage in this particular angle, I have to say.
slightly loppy like that. Yeah, that's nice. Iain and Shamista, I don't want to bully you into answering, but I just want to see if you've got anything you want to add to that. If not.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's been a difficult year for writers everywhere, in that no readings were possible and no gatherings and no direct exchange, which is beautiful to meet other poets and to talk about poetry when gathering in some cafe, as Carol said, or some bar. But at the same time, of course, we've been very fortunate, right? Because we were stuck in the place where we write all the time, or where we work all the time. Other people have been less fortunate. So I do have to admit that I enjoyed the quiet, or the forced upon quiet at first, and did write a lot more and translated a lot more. But I am looking forward to some future in which we can all leave that room again and gather.
Yes, that will be nice. One thing that we discussed this in our introduction to the anthology, the vast majority of pandemics haven't produced a great amount of literature directly about them that we now remember, and my suspicion is that that's largely because of the deadening effect they tend to have, and the fact that they're as much as anything can be, they're shared. We all know what it's like to experience on some level. I mean, we have our own subjectivity, of course, but there's something we're all going through together, and it's not something that we've done to each other in the same way that, say, a war is. You know, the First World War produced a great amount of poetry, first of all, in this country anyway, first of all, very patriotic verse, and then a reaction to that to show the grim reality. It's a different kind of shared endeavour, and I think that has a lot to do with it. There are exceptions. The AIDS pandemic, lots of wonderful poetry came out of that, and there are other exceptions too. But for the most part, what we found, however, with this project is that lots and lots of people are writing poetry about the circumstances that we're all going through. How much of that will be remembered is for the great sifter time to figure out.
Rory, I think that point you're making is an interest. Lots of people are writing, and I think one of the things we assumed is that it would almost start sounding like a common poetry. However, I don't think that's the case at all. And one of the things I might bring Sharmista in here. Not at all. One of the things that Sharmista says in David, when we were talking during the interview with the Scottish Poetry Library, was with how different and how important it is to recognize the differences of experience and the differences of expression. And I just wondered, Sharmista, if you might say a little bit about that, because I think that's one of the most important things that we recognized as the project has evolved. And like I said earlier, 1,000 poems have been published on the website. And while they share certain things, they're all very different. They're all individual expression or communal expressions of people coming together, writing in collaborative ways sometimes. But they are different, and I think that's so central to the aesthetic and to the ethos.
If I may, Anthony, I'll just read a little bit from the letters that David and I wrote to each other. I'll read a brief section of it where we talk about this. I've said, as the entire world goes through this pandemic, what I become conscious of are the similarities, but even more of the great differences of every geography. How have the sounds around you changed during this time, if at all? Here in Mumbai, which is defined by a very dense soundscape, any pervasive silence only means a kind of tragedy is moving underneath it. I sit inside my apartment with a view of trees, birds, and a small church. But there are no sounds of people who come calling on the street every day to sell their fruit or vegetables, fish or mangoes, handmade flutes, and men who come with a long tin cart to buy discarded things of any kind at all. There are no songs drifting on the breeze from when festivals are celebrated. Holi, the festival of spring, when people throw colored powders on each other and drink intoxicants and dance, came and went without a sound.
It was lovely. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I should say in the anthology, after each poet pairings collaborations, we've given them space for a collaborative statement, and the collaborative statements are, wonderful in themselves. They're poems in themselves. The last question I might ask, because we are coming up to 8:30, and I do want to bring in Lauren, Iain, and Sam, and it's a question for the three of you to think about in terms of creativity and criticality, and I suppose the dualism and the collapsing of the boundaries between criticality and creativity, whether one's translating or indeed finishing PhDs, as you did, Lauren, and as you did, Sam. So maybe, Lauren, do you mind starting?
No problem. I think for me, most of my poems kind of come from my engagement with kind of theories and other texts that I'm reading. So you'll notice that in my reading, I was kind of responding to modernist art with the Joseph Cornell, and throughout kind of a lot of my poems, I'm also responding to types of techniques that the modernist poets were also using. So a lot of mine are kind of these strange prose poems with interlocking sentences that kind of border on madness almost. So yeah, I'm really interested in how the kind of critical and creative practice kind of is intertwined, I think, and that's something that my thesis really kind of touches on. I write this kind of manifesto for plastic writing in my thesis as well, because I'm really interested as well in how we can perhaps use the concept of neuroscience and the way that we perceive the world at a kind of cognitive level, and how we can perhaps begin to translate that onto the page in poems too. So I think in the future I'll be kind of looking more into that.
Lauren, do you think the pandemic year, as one of our question askers put it, affected the way you finished your thesis? Which is, I suppose, more a question that might be of interest to people who are doing one, but I think it is an interesting question.
Yeah, I found it really difficult because suddenly kind of all of our access to libraries and that type of thing was suddenly kind of taken away, and those quiet writing spaces that we were so used to having, like the PhD office at NTU, they suddenly kind of weren't there anymore. And one of the ways we've kind of adapted to that is that a few of my kind of PhD colleagues, we've started this virtual office where we'll just kind of sit there on Teams and pretend we're in an office environment together, so that we have that kind of small talk and that kind of support from the rest of the group. So that's been really lovely. So yeah, I'm kind of indebted to my PhD virtual office in that way, I would say. But yeah, it's been really difficult, and I've struggled to write in general, I think, throughout the pandemic so far. And I think as well, kind of finishing the PhD, I've had some time away from poetry, and I've kind of gone back to another love of mine, which is fiction writing. So I've just started writing as a really kind of new experience for me, so I'm excited about that.
Oh, good for you. And you talk about the community that you had, and of course you did have a great community, and do still have one, of course. Iain, I just want to bring you in to ask about translation. I suppose it's a sort of very different thing, but has the pandemic affected your translation work at all? The amount you've had, or how you found doing it?
As in a way, because normally I would, be doing a lot of events and readings and giving talks and things, which have all been cancelled. And I do this alongside translating, have longer translation projects, translating novels and volumes of poetry and so on. And in this case, all of that collapsed. I'm not the translating the books. The publishers still want to publish books. And I have enough work to be getting on with for the next few years. But the thing that changed was that because I had no events, I also had some free space. And I've been translating a lot of very small projects, one after the other. An essay here, poems, prose, short prose, and that kind of thing, in a way that I hadn't been doing before. I mean, I think I used to do that quite a long time ago, but I sort of got on to doing book after book and not thinking too much about the smaller things. And something like this, for instance, is typical of what I mean. I've just got a series going through most of the first part of this year with small things. I say small things, but they're very challenging. Just one thing about the criticality to creativity thing, a little detail, anecdotal almost. I found myself with more space, more time, going through old journals that I hadn't got around to reading, especially from the time when I was bringing up my children around the beginning of this century. So a lot of the journals that I subscribed to around, kind of late 90s through till about 2005 to 2008 probably, I had just put on a pile and forgotten about. And I went back to them and started reading them. And of course, you know, instead of reading quite a lot of, say, the old TLSs or whatever, I generally just find one essay that is very good. And I think, wow, I missed this. This is really worth reading. And and I often find as well that I'm underlining bits, taking notes, and also stimulated by those old issues that somehow become very relevant and useful to me now.
Yeah, thank you. There's lots I could say in response to that, but largely I agree, and I've had a quite comparable experience in terms of what I've been reading and how I've been digging back into things, and also my great love of kind of the insightful, important essay, which is an art that I think is in some ways being lost a little bit at the moment, and I'd like to see more of it. I'm going to pass to Anthony for just I think the last question or two, and then he'll pass back to me to close the event.
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass to Sam, because we're incredibly indebted to Sam, who's been the research assistant on this generously funded Arts and Humanities Research Council project. And Sam has been the muscle behind the website. Sam, I was wondering if you might come in here and just talk about this experience of processing, 1,000 poems over the past 9 months, and what your feelings are and what your findings are.
Yeah, it's been an incredible experience. And I think one thing that struck me and us right at the beginning was the amount of humor that we were receiving. Right from when we launched the website, there was far more humor in the poems than tragedy, or at least there was sort of compassion and poignancy in that humor. But I thought that was a really, really interesting way that people were negotiating what was going on. Going back to that form question as well, one thing that's also struck me is the amount of haikus that we've received. We receive haikus very, very frequently, and they are generally on the kind of domestic sphere, and these kind of short, sharp contemplations on the everyday, which feels like a lot of the poems we receive. And we receive sort of 2 or 3 a day, to the point where keeping on top of the email account is tricky enough. So apologies if you've waited for a long time for a reply from that email account. But a lot of the poems do focus on this sort of everyday domestic sphere, or on the walks, or on the adventures that people are going on. So it does feel as though you are let into each individual's life and each individual's experience. And there's only very few poems that actually mention COVID directly, or the effects that COVID has on the body. The website as a whole sort of forms a much more rich tapestry of how culture and art and just the everyday journeys that we take have changed. So yeah, it's been an amazing adventure, and just sort of, real privilege to open up a lot of those pieces. Finally, I'll just say that another real privilege has been the amount of poems we've received from people who say it's the first time they've ever written a poem, and it's the first time they've ever submitted a poem. And that's been absolutely wonderful, and they're kind of so thrilled to get it published as well. And so it's really, really great to have some conversations with those people as well.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, thank you. From me, I just want to say I'm very appreciative of being kind of charged with this project, and being enabled by all of the wonderful writers, including those here tonight. So a thank you to Sinead and Iain and Iain, to David and Sharmista, to Carol and Rakshan, to Lauren, to Sam, and then a thank you to my co-investigator, Rory Waterman, who I'll hand back to right now.
I don't think I've ever been called an investigator before. I quite appreciate that. It sounds very technical and important, and I take it. Thank you very much. Thank you to my co-investigator, Professor Anthony Caleshu, and to Sam Kemp, Dr. Kemp, newly minted, who's been a wonderful support to this project. If you email us at poetry and COVID, not an ampersand, but the word and, poetry and COVID sam@gmail.com. It's Sam you'll be talking to. He does lots of wonderful work, and we have him to thank as well for largely for the website too. Thank you to our poets and translator with us tonight. You've all been wonderful. One thing that surprised me a little and delighted me entirely with the anthology is the range of not just styles and poetries, which we expected and hoped for, but also the range of ways in which people have engaged with what it is to collaborate. So sometimes poets were writing poems in response to one another, sometimes poems on the same subjects. In other instances, some poets were collaborating line by line, stanza by stanza, finishing one another off, beginning one another. It was wonderful to see. There was plenty of humour in the book as well, actually, as it turns out, and many other things besides. If you want to buy that, you can do so from the Shearsman website. If you type in Shearsman and you go to the website, you type in poetry and COVID-19, you'll find that there. Thank you very much to all of our attendees for coming, as well as our poets and translator. And please go to the Nottingham Creative Writing Hub website, which is www.nottinghamcreativewritinghub.com, to register for forthcoming events. As I say, these are put on by my colleagues and our students in NTU's Department of English Media and Communications, and they're all free to attend. The next event is the novelist Okechukwu Nzelu reading with NTU PhD student and poet Panya Banjoko and NTU BA Creative Writing student Lauren Morey, chaired by my colleague and friend Jenny Ramone. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that as well. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you again to our poets. Take care and enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.